Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the purpose of a methods chapter. Just like we started our class with the purpose of the dissertation or our Gordian knot and the purpose of the introduction chapter. So the methods chapter is a bit more straightforward. There isn't as much need to have a golden thread of logic. If you can get one out of your chapter, your methods chapter, that's amazing, but it's not necessary. Each of the chunks actually kind of work independently. While the methods chapter seems like it's pretty straightforward, and that makes things simpler, or so it seems. One of the biggest challenges of our methods chapter is that you might be writing about a research approach or method that first is complicated in and of itself. So it's hard to actually talk about. And second, you are likely writing about a research method you're not familiar with or haven't applied or haven't used before. And honestly, you're not supposed to have done this before. And you're not supposed to have expertise in a research method at this point. Remember that while you're at the end of your doctoral journey, you're really at the beginning of your work as a scholar practitioner. So you're still building and learning these skills. But that also means that it can be hard to see what details you're missing as you talk about your methods, how to see and address potential pitfalls and that are typically associated with your method, because every method has potential pitfalls, or the inaccuracies in the way you're describing your methods. And by the way, that's why we have advisors. They are the ones that help us understand how our methods work. But I digress. This mini lesson is really about the purpose of our methods chapter. And just like the purpose of an introduction, the purpose of a methods chapter are twofold. There is the explicit, and then there are the implicit purposes of the method chapter. So let's harken back to our Gordian knot. Recall that in our first strand of our Gordian knot, there is the expectation that you are able to conduct original research. And this is related to what is most likely the most explicit purpose of the methods chapter. And that is to prove that you can conduct ethical research using an accepted research method. Now, the second strand, or the opportunity to demonstrate to the scholarly community that you are a peer, is a bit more implicit. It's to prove to the discipline that you have fully taken into account all the aspects of your research design and have designed a study that you can conduct with fidelity so that you produce results that are valid, reliable, and actually appropriate for answering your research questions. This is to recognize that you recognize variables and have taken the measures to control these as much as possible. In your final chapter, you will be making assertions about what the data tells you, how it answers your research questions. The discipline is looking to see that these methods that you used allows you actually to make those assertions about the data. So that's why it's so important. And I want you to remember, as some of you start thinking about collecting your data, there's the data we wish we had and the data that we get. Your methods help you constrain your assertions about the data that you get. Now, the third strand, which is bringing your whole self to this process, is really about you. Your research, to the best of your ability, should be objective. We know, especially in qualitative and actually quantitative as well, that the researcher cannot fully be removed. And some methods you might be using argue that the researcher shouldn't be removed. But typically, you'll answer the question, have you considered your biases or positionality and how that could potentially corrupt your data? And what have you done to mitigate that? That's a major part of the methods chapter. Let's dig a little deeper into the explicit purpose of the methods chapter, or what we're calling strand 1. Next week's mini lesson, we'll talk more about the specific content and style of your methods chapter. So this overview is going to be more general. Like the introduction chapter, the methods chapter is designed to answer questions. For your proposal, you'll write about what you intend to do. For your defense, you'll explain what you actually did, and there may be some differences between there. That's okay. Sometimes adjustments need to be made. But the basic questions that you'll be answering for the methods chapter are, what is the context of your study? That's where it's placed, the institution it might be in, the community it might be in. Who are you studying? And how did you determine why that was the best population to study to answer your research questions? And then you're going to provide in detail what's your plan. And this is more like a recipe. Now, especially in qualitative research and probably in quantitative research at this level, we can't really do enough to be able to create research projects that can be fully replicated with fidelity. But we need to constantly be thinking, how could somebody reproduce my study? So this part of your methods chapter is really like writing a recipe. What do you do? How do you do it? How are you going to make it happen? What do you need to know? What are those extra special things you need to take into account? So let's go. That third research question really is, what is your plan? And there are some sub questions that you need to consider as well, like what instruments, procedures, or protocol are you going to use? How do you know that they're appropriate? And you can cite that. And how do you know that they're valid? And you can also cite that, especially if you're using protocols that are associated with that method, or you're using instruments that have already been validated. Now, the fourth question is this study ethical? This is an easy one to answer. It's usually just a single sentence that says that this project was approved by an IRB, or an institutional review board. Most likely that will either be Edgewood, or if you're conducting this research at a different institution, Edgewood may have ceded IRB oversight to them. That would be the institution. You just put in that's the institution that said it's cool, and you put in your IRB number. Now there's the fifth question that you answer in your methods chapter. And this is, what are the potential ways, and this is the hard part, what are the potential ways your data could be corrupted or made invalid, and how do you plan to mitigate this? If you get to your proposal stage and you're not quite sure how to do that, that's okay. Proposal really is a rough draft. You want it to be as whole as possible, but it's, especially in the methods, you may not know how to write about it quite yet, and that's okay. You may not have had those conversations with your advisor to talk about how data could be corrupted, and that's okay. It's just something that you will add into chapter 3 at some point. I want you to keep those 5 questions in the back of your mind and see how that author or how you are going about answering them. So that's it for this week. Happy reverse outlining. If you're having a hard time finding an exemplar chapter, make sure you reach out to myself or Dr. Dowd in the library. We are more than happy to help you find an appropriate dissertation exemplar that complements the methods you're using. Looking forward to seeing your reverse outlines next Saturday and getting started on chapter 3, our methods chapter of our dissertation.